I have very fond memories of Newham and being in Respect, and we did very, very well. We did that 2005 election. We got the 4 biggest swings in electoral history since the Second World War. Sam were in Birmingham, George obviously in Tower Hamlets, and myself and Abdul Khalik Mian in Newham, in West Ham and East Ham. And I was very pleased to hear that we have a councillor here from Plaistow North, which I know well. I campaigned in the constituency, so it's really, really good to be here. And we're starting all this again, and I think that's a very encouraging and great thing. So I'd like to thank firstly the organisers and to thank everybody who's here, and what a very, very good conference this has been, and how hopeful it is about what we can build for the future. And I just wanted to say a few words about Gaza and about the movement, but also a little bit about what I think how we should try and kind of look forward. The first thing is about Gaza. I mean, other comrades have referred to the absolute mayhem that is going on, and the lies of the IDF over the gunshots of the 100 people who've been killed, scrambling for flour because they're starving, hungry, there's no aid going in. Joe Biden now says we'll airlift some food. This is just a token, a complete token to try to justify themselves and absolve themselves of any criticism that is going on. And we should be aware it's not just in this country. Biden had 13% of the votes in the Michigan primary last week were votes for uncommitted. In other words, they weren't going to support him, people who normally would support him. And he will find, just as Keir Starmer is finding, that if you do not support a ceasefire, if you watch this genocide going on, and actually in the case of the United States, you're arming it every single day, then you will reap the consequences electorally, and that will be nobody's fault but your own. When we look in this country, James Cleverly, the Home Secretary, last week said, demonstrations have had their day. Surely they've made their point, as though you do it once and then forget about the genocide that's going on in Gaza every day. People should be doing things through the ballot box. And then when they do things through the ballot box, like in Rochdale, they're told that's just as bad as demonstrating. And that, you know, you're just like the hate marchers, you're just like all these people, you're full of hate, you're Muslims, you know, all these, as if the people who voted in Rochdale were all Muslims for George Galloway. They can't possibly have been. There were a whole range of people did, because we should remember 66% of people in this country want a ceasefire now. That is not 66% all Muslims. That is across society, that they do not want what is going on. And let's also remember it the other way around. Do we think Muslims don't care about the NHS or their children's education or what's happening to housing? It's an insult, and it's a racial attempt to try to belittle a very, very large and a very, very important community in this country, to try and suggest they're only interested in these questions and that's what they vote for. It is completely wrong and completely unacceptable. And I think what our movement has shown, we've had now we've got by next week 10 national marches, thousands and thousands of local activities across the country. This is going on all the time. They are at a faster pace than the ones we had over Iraq. I think Salma made that point earlier. People are moving much more quickly. They're doing things day after day. They're showing tremendous energy. And by the way, many of them are women. I reckon possibly the majority of people on our marches are women. Certainly the majority of stewards on these hate marches and the mobs and all these sorts of things are women. And that tells you something. It tells you that there is a massive group of people in this country who want change and who are absolutely fed up with not just with the Tory party, which I think the whole of society practically is, but also with the Labour Party, which has let them down. And when you cannot see a difference between the two parties over any single major question of policy, then you have a huge democratic deficit. And that is what you are standing up for. And in that sense, you represent millions of people in this country who also do not think they have an alternative. And that's why these discussions and what we're talking about today are so important. And I personally will say now that the people who are standing as independents in the council and the people who stand as independents in the local election, in the general election, I will personally support those people on the kind of programmes that have been outlined today, because it is so important that we stand together and we give those people the maximum support. And it's a very difficult thing to do, because we're not going to win loads of seats, in my opinion. People might disagree with that, but I think it's much tougher. In Newham, you know how tough it is to actually win against Labour because it's a monolith. But it puts up an alternative voice and it shows people there is a real alternative, and that's how you build something for the future. But I just want to make a couple of points about this, because we've had a whole number of attempts at this, both with Respect, but also in many other attempts at new parties in various countries across Europe. We've had all those going on, and none of them so far have actually succeeded in doing what we wanted to do. I haven't got time to go into the reasons, but there are a whole range of reasons. It's a very tough thing to do, and people move in all sorts of different directions when they do it. We also had Corbynism, the leader of the Labour Party, a principled socialist for the first time ever, and somebody who did try to implement these things. What happened to Corbynism? What happened to Corbynism was that it wasn't just up against a right wing in the Labour Party, it was up against the whole state machine. When you have, I very much agree with people, we're opposed to all forms of racism, but let's make one distinction between anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. Islamophobia is driven not just by individual prejudice, although that is very widespread, it's driven by the state in this country. That is why there's these attacks that are coming from, and by the way, if we want somebody to stand about, what against Lindsay Hoyle in Chorlton? You're not supposed to stand against the Speaker, but I hope very much somebody does, and I hope they defeat it. But it's being driven by politicians who will not justify their actions, who refuse to justify their actions, who keep pretending they're for a ceasefire but are really not for a ceasefire. The same is true of the civil liberties attacks. They don't like our politics, so they're trying to change the law to make it harder and harder for us to organise. So in that situation, we have to think hard about why Corbynism didn't succeed. There are many, many reasons, but one was that it came up against a state which was determined not to let Jeremy Corbyn be the next Prime Minister, not to let him be in charge of the nuclear button and the armed forces and all this kind of thing. That was a very, very deliberate and systematic attempt. And if we're talking about building a new party, we have to recognise the failures of Labour and Labour's closeness to the imperialist system, Labour's closeness to the whole way in which the system is operating, and we have to think about doing something different. And we have to therefore look not just at the very, very good programmes, what we stand for, all the different things that we stand for, but also how we are going to implement those and how we are going to face up to the people who will do anything they can to stop us implementing. Just conclude by saying this, that if you look in the 1920s and 1930s was the rise of the far right and fascism across Europe, just as there is now. Actually, probably more serious even than what we're seeing, obviously with Hitler coming to power, much more serious than what we've seen so far. Why, in the end of the day, did that succeed? One very important reason was that the Liberals and the ruling class were more frightened of the left than they were of the right. And that's something, again, not that that should frighten us. We are many, they are few, but it should make us understand that we have a formidable enemy. Therefore, it's not just numbers. We've also got to think strategically about how we build. So those are my thoughts. Thank you so much for everything that you've all done individually, for what everybody has done collectively in the anti-war movement. We are going to keep organising and keep mobilising. We will bring solidarity with Gaza. We will force a ceasefire on Israel. We will get justice for the Palestinians, but we also want to transform our society, and that is going to be a job which will take all our efforts and millions of other people as well. Thank you very much.